I pressed play on the voice message while sitting in my car across from Emily's office, the engine idling low, heater pushing dry air at the windshield. Denver was already going dark, that flat blue-gray winter light settling over the glass buildings and dirty snow piled along the curb. She had texted me 20 minutes earlier. Staying late. Overtime. Don't wait up. I remember looking at that message and not feeling anything at first. Not suspicion. Not anger. Just the dull, familiar acceptance that had started showing up more and more over the last few months. She worked late. She had responsibilities. She was moving up. That was the story, and I had gotten used to living inside it. The voice message came in right after. No name attached. Just a forwarded audio file sitting there on my screen. I almost didn't open it. Then I did. There was a second of rustling, the muffled sound of movement, and then a man's voice, calm, casual, like he was confirming something routine. Same room as last time? I stopped it there. I didn't need the rest. I didn't need context or tone or an explanation that could be bent into something harmless. That one line was enough. It hit with a kind of precision that left no room for confusion. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I sat there with my phone in my hand and watched people come and go through the office entrance like nothing in the world had changed. But something had. I could feel it, clear and immediate, like a switch being pulled somewhere deep inside me. I didn't grip the steering wheel, didn't swear, didn't even breathe differently. Something in me just shut off. Not my thoughts, not my eyes, just the part that had still been trying to believe her. From where I was parked, I could see the top floors catching the last of the light. Somewhere in that building, Emily was working late. Somewhere in that same city, a room had already been chosen once before, enough times for a man to ask that question like it belonged to a pattern. I set the phone face down on the console and stared through the windshield. That was the moment my marriage ended. We had been living in Denver for just over 2 years by then. Long enough for routines to settle, short enough that everything still felt like something we were building rather than something finished. I'm Mark, 31. I work operations for a mid-sized logistics company. Steady hours, predictable problems, nothing that follows me home if I don't let it. Emily was the opposite. She had momentum. That's the word she used. At 30, she had already moved up twice in her company, each time with more responsibility, more visibility, more late nights that seemed justified by where things were headed. I remember being proud of that. I told people about it like it was something we had both earned. She's killing it, I'd say, and I believed it. Her supervisor, Richard, came up often in conversation, not in a way that stood out, just enough to feel normal. He was older, mid-40s maybe. Married, from what I understood. Calm, measured, the kind of guy who didn't raise his voice and didn't need to. The first time I met him at a company event, he shook my hand, held eye contact, asked about my work like he actually cared. There was nothing about him that triggered anything in me. If anything, I filed him under safe. Mentor type. The kind of person you want your wife learning from. Looking back, that part matters. Because there was never a clear moment where things felt wrong. Not in the beginning. It was all gradual. Small adjustments that didn't demand attention on their own. Her schedule shifted first. Big project, she said one night, slipping off her shoes by the door without looking up. We're pushing timelines. That became a pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays started stretching later. Then occasional weekends. Her tone stayed consistent. Focused, slightly tired, but controlled. No complaints, just facts. I didn't push. Part of that was trust. The other part was convenience. My days were full enough that I didn't feel the need to examine hers too closely. When she said she was working, I accepted it because it made everything simpler. We kept eating dinner together when we could. Same kitchen, same plates, same conversations about nothing important. But there was a shift in how present she was. Subtle, easy to ignore. She'd check her phone mid-sentence. Pause, respond to something, then come back like nothing happened. Sorry, just work, she'd say. I'd nod. There were nights she came home energized instead of drained. That didn't register at the time either. I told myself it meant things were going well, that she was in the right place, doing the right kind of work. And maybe part of me didn't want to look closer because everything still looked intact from a distance. No fights, no obvious distance. No moment where you could point and say, that's where it changed. It was easier to believe it was just work. After that voice message, things didn't suddenly become obvious. There was no dramatic shift, no moment where everything lined up all at once. It was quieter than that. More like details I had already seen before, just settling into place differently. The first thing I noticed was her phone. It had always been around, like anyone else's, but now it had a position. Face down on the table. Screen turned away when she sat next to me. If a notification came in, she didn't check it immediately anymore. She'd wait, then pick it up casually, like it didn't matter. Before, she never thought about that. I didn't react. I just started paying attention. Her schedule started to feel less like work and more like something repeating. Meetings that were mentioned once and never again. Deadlines that didn't seem to lead anywhere. I'd ask how a project went, and she'd answer in general terms, nothing specific enough to follow up on. Good. Busy. We're making progress. Always the same structure. Enough detail to sound real, not enough to anchor it. Then there were the names. She used to say Richard, with a certain tone, professional, distant, almost formal. After that message, I noticed it change. Not dramatically, just a slight drop in that distance. Like she wasn't thinking about how it sounded anymore. One night, she said his name in the middle of a sentence and corrected herself immediately after, like she had said too much without realizing it. I didn't respond. I just stored it. Small things started stacking. She'd say a meeting got moved, but later in the week, she wouldn't mention it again. Not rescheduled, not canceled, just gone. I started noticing gaps where information should have been. Her clothes changed too, but not in a way that would stand out to anyone else. Subtle upgrades. Different combinations. Things she didn't wear to the office before suddenly becoming part of her long-day routine. It wasn't about one piece of evidence. It was the pattern. That's what shifted for me. I stopped seeing each detail as separate. Instead, I started watching how they repeated. Same days, same tone, same kind of explanations that didn't quite connect to anything real. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. What stayed with me most wasn't what I found. It was how long it had been there. How many times I had heard the same phrases, seen the same behaviors, and let them pass without question. Not because I couldn't see it, because I didn't put it together. After that message, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was recognizing. I didn't confront her. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. That was the first real decision I made after everything started to settle into place. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I realized I didn't need them the way I thought I did. Whatever explanation she could give me would only exist to manage what I already knew. So I didn't ask. The next few days looked exactly the same on the outside. Same routine, same conversations, same dinners at the kitchen table where nothing important was said. If anything, I was more consistent than before. I didn't change my tone, didn't pull away, didn't give her anything to react to. But internally, something had already shifted. I stopped trying to understand her. That was the break. Up until that point, every small inconsistency had come with a question attached. Why is she late? Why didn't she mention that meeting again? Why does this feel different? My mind had been working in the background, trying to close gaps, trying to make things align. After that message, that process ended. There was nothing left to solve. I remember sitting across from her one night while she talked about work, something about deadlines, pressure, expectations. The words were familiar, structured the same way they always were. I nodded at the right moments, asked a simple follow-up question when it made sense. From the outside, it was a normal conversation. Inside, I wasn't there. Not emotionally, not mentally. I was listening the way you listen to something that no longer applies to you. Clear, focused, but detached. That was new. There was no anger in it. No urge to interrupt or call anything out. Just distance. Clean and quiet. Later that night, she fell asleep before I did. That wasn't unusual. What was different was how I looked at her. Not with resentment. Not with sadness. Just observation. Like I was already separating what was mine from what wasn't. I didn't check her phone. I didn't go through her things. That kind of urgency never showed up. It felt unnecessary. Whatever I needed to see was already happening in front of me, repeating on its own. And I had time. That became clear to me somewhere in the middle of that week. There was no deadline. No pressure to act quickly. The situation wasn't going anywhere. If anything, it was stable. Predictable. So I let it continue. I kept showing up the same way. Same schedule. Same habits. No sudden changes that would force anything into the open. Because by then, I wasn't trying to fix it. I was stepping out of it. Quietly, without interruption, without announcement. By the time anything would eventually surface, I already knew I wouldn't be part of it anymore. Once I stopped reacting, the details became easier to track. Not because there were more of them, but because I wasn't filtering anything anymore. I wasn't deciding what mattered and what didn't. I was just watching it all repeat. Her, over time, settled into a pattern first. Tuesdays and Thursdays, almost without exception. Occasionally a Sunday evening, usually framed as something urgent that couldn't wait until Monday. The language stayed consistent. Same phrasing, same tone, like she was reading from a version of the same explanation each time. I might be late tonight. Things ran over. Don't wait up. I stopped responding with questions. Just short acknowledgments. Enough to keep everything normal. What stood out more was what happened before she left. There were nights when she'd already told me she was at the office, then came back into the bedroom to change. Not fully, just adjustments. Different blouse. Different shoes. Sometimes she'd redo her hair in a way that didn't match the idea of staying late behind a desk. The first time I noticed it, I thought I misread it. The third time, I knew I hadn't. I didn't mention it. Instead, I started keeping track of timing. Not written down, not formal. Just mentally noting how long things took. When she said she arrived, when she said she left, how those times lined up with everything else. They didn't. There were gaps. Not large enough to raise immediate suspicion if you weren't looking for them, but consistent enough to form a pattern. Extra time that didn't belong to anything she described. Her calendar changed too. She started referencing internal meetings more often. Vague, undefined. No names attached, no clear purpose. When I'd ask who was involved, she'd keep it broad. Just the team. Nothing major. But those meetings followed the same schedule as the overtime. That was the part that made it clear. It wasn't random. It wasn't occasional pressure from work. It was structured, repeating in cycles that didn't require adjustment because they weren't tied to anything real. One night, she left earlier than usual for one of those late days. Said she needed to be there before everyone else. I watched her walk out, then waited a few minutes and stepped onto the balcony. Her car was still there. 5 minutes later, she came back out, changed jacket, different shoes, then left again. No explanation. No acknowledgement. Just a reset. I didn't follow her. That never felt necessary. Everything I needed was already happening in plain view. Following her would have been for confirmation, but I was already past that point. What mattered was consistency, and the consistency was there. Same days. Same preparation. Same gaps in time that couldn't be accounted for by anything she said. I wasn't building a case. I was watching a system. And once you see something as a system, you understand that it doesn't depend on you noticing it. It keeps running the same way, whether you pay attention or not. I just happened to start paying attention. The message from Nick came on a Wednesday evening. Not through anything connected to her work. Not a company email, not a forwarded thread, not something that could be explained away as part of her normal routine. It came through an old forum account I hadn't used in years. A place where people posted about projects, tools, random things that had nothing to do with real life. That's why it stood out. I was sitting in the living room when the notification came in. Emily was in the bedroom, getting ready for another late night. Same pattern, same timing. I opened it without thinking much about it. The username was familiar. Nick, one of the guys I had exchanged messages with a few times years back. Nothing personal, just occasional back and forth on threads. The message itself was short. Check where she really is after work. That was it. No explanation. No build-up. No attempt to soften it or frame it as a question. Just a statement, direct and finished. I didn't respond. I read it once, then again, looking for something hidden in it. Some detail that would explain why he was reaching out now, after all this time, and why it had anything to do with me. There wasn't anything else. I set the phone down and leaned back into the couch, listening to the quiet movement from the bedroom. Drawers opening, closing. The soft rhythm of someone getting ready to leave. The message didn't change what I already knew. It confirmed something else. This wasn't contained. Up until that point, everything had been inside the boundaries of our life. Our apartment, her schedule, my observations. Even the voice message, it felt like something that had reached me by accident, not intention. But this was different. Someone else had seen something, or heard something, or knew enough to step outside of their own space and send that message to me directly. That meant whatever was happening wasn't as controlled as it looked. It wasn't limited to private rooms and careful timing. It had edges now. Points where other people could see it, recognize it, and choose what to do with it. I didn't ask Nick what he meant. I didn't need details from him. If anything, asking would have pulled me into something reactive, something messy. I wasn't interested in that. I wasn't looking for someone else's version of events. I already had my own. Emily walked out a few minutes later, dressed the way she always was on those nights. Clean, composed, like everything made sense. "I'll be late," she said, picking up her keys. I nodded. "All right." She paused for a second, like she was waiting for something more. A question, maybe. Or just acknowledgement that felt closer than that. I didn't give it to her. She left without saying anything else. I stayed where I was, listening to the door close, the sound of her steps fading down the hallway, then nothing. The apartment settled into silence again. I picked up my phone, looked at the message one more time, then locked the screen. At that point, it wasn't just between us anymore. And that didn't complicate things. If anything, it made them clearer. I didn't bring it up until everything was already in motion. By the time the papers were ready, there was nothing left to clarify. No missing pieces, no uncertainty, no need to hear her version of anything. Whatever story she might have told, it wouldn't have changed the structure I had been watching for weeks. I chose a normal evening. She came home at a reasonable time for once. No overtime, no rushed explanations. Just a quiet return, like the kind we used to have before any of this started. She set her bag down, moved through the kitchen, asked if I had eaten. I answered the same way I always did. Yeah. There was no tension in the air. If anything, it felt balanced. Predictable. That mattered more than anything else. I wasn't interested in creating a moment. I just needed it to happen. I had already placed the envelope on the table earlier that day. Not hidden, not emphasized. Just there, aligned with everything else, like it belonged in the room. She noticed it halfway through the conversation. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up. Her tone was neutral at first. Curious, but not concerned. "Open it," I said. She did. I watched her face more than the papers. That was where the real information was. The shift didn't come immediately. It took a few seconds, like her mind was catching up to what she was looking at. Then it changed. Not dramatically, just a subtle tightening around her eyes, a pause in her breathing. She looked up at me. "What is this?" "Divorce papers," I said. No explanation attached. No added weight to the words. She blinked, like she expected something else to follow. Something that would frame it, soften it, or at least connect it to a conversation. Nothing came. "You're serious?" she asked. "I am." She set the papers down slowly, then picked them back up, scanning through them again like the content might shift if she read it twice. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "Where is this coming from?" I leaned back in my chair. Maybe it doesn't have to. That was the closest I came to explaining anything. She stared at me for a long moment, trying to read something in my expression that wasn't there anymore. "You think I did something," she said carefully. "I think a lot of things," I replied. "But it doesn't change this." Her voice sharpened slightly. "You're wrong. Whatever you think this is, it's more complicated than that." I nodded once. "Maybe." She waited again, like that word was an opening. It wasn't. The silence stretched longer this time. She shifted in her seat, looked back down at the papers, then back at me. "Can we talk about this?" she asked. "We are talking." "That's not what I mean." I didn't respond. She exhaled, slower now, the control starting to slip just slightly at the edges. "Mark, this isn't how you handle something like this." I held her gaze. "It is for me." That was the moment it settled for her. Not all at once, but enough. She leaned back in her chair, the papers still in her hands, and for the first time, she didn't have anything immediate to say. There was no scene, no raised voices, just a quiet recognition that whatever space we used to share had already closed before she even saw it. After that conversation, things didn't escalate. They moved. Not quickly, not all at once, but with a kind of steady progression that didn't require my involvement. It was like stepping off something that had already started rolling downhill. I didn't follow up with her after that night. No check-ins. No attempts to revisit the conversation. She tried a few times over the next couple of days. Short questions, neutral tones, looking for a way to reopen it. "Can we go over this again? Just explain what you think is going on." I kept my answers minimal. "There's nothing to go over." That was enough. At the same time, things outside of us started shifting. I heard about it through someone at work first. Not directly connected, just a passing comment about a company downtown dealing with an internal issue. Nothing specific. just enough to catch my attention because of the timing. Then a few days later, it became clearer. Someone had sent information to their HR department. Details. Messages. Enough to trigger something formal. I didn't ask how. I didn't try to trace it back. It wasn't relevant to me anymore. Whatever had been happening behind closed doors had crossed into a space where it couldn't stay controlled. That was the difference. Richard disappeared first. Not publicly, not with an announcement. Just gone. His name stopped coming up. His presence removed from whatever structure had been built around him. The kind of quiet exit companies use when they don't want to draw attention but can't ignore something either. Emily stayed. For a while. She still left in the mornings, still followed something close to her routine. But the consistency was gone. The same confidence in her timing, her explanations, it wasn't there anymore. She became more aware of herself. More careful. Not with me. With everything. I noticed it in small ways. The way she checked her phone more often, but not as casually as before. The way she paused before answering simple questions, like she was measuring each response. The system had broken. Not completely, but enough that it couldn't run the same way. We didn't talk about any of it. Not the investigation. Not Richard. Not the shift happening around her. Whatever needed to be addressed was already outside the apartment, moving on its own. About a month after the papers, she stopped going in. No explanation to me. No discussion. Just a change. She stayed home one morning, then the next. The routine ended without ceremony, like it had never really belonged to her in the first place. I didn't ask. There was nothing to confirm. Everything that needed to unfold had already started doing it on its own, and I wasn't part of it anymore. The separation didn't come with a moment. There was no final conversation, no agreement that marked the exact point where things ended. It had already been decided before anything was said out loud. Everything after that was just execution. She moved out in stages. At first, it was small things. Clothes missing from the closet, a few drawers emptied without comment. Then larger pieces. Boxes by the door. Items that used to belong to both of us suddenly becoming hers without discussion. We didn't coordinate it. She packed when I wasn't there. I noticed what was gone when I got back. It was efficient that way. No overlap. No reason to stand in the same space and explain anything. I had already separated the accounts by then. Not aggressively. Just cleanly. What was mine stayed mine. What was shared was divided in a way that didn't require negotiation. There were no arguments about money, no back and forth over details. It was handled the same way everything else had been. Quietly. She tried to reach out a few times during that period. Calls at first. Then messages when I didn't answer. We need to talk. This isn't how things should end. Just give me a chance to explain. I read them. I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to punish her. That part wasn't there. It was simpler than that. There was nothing left to gain from a conversation. No version of events she could offer would change what I had already seen, already understood. And more importantly, I wasn't interested in reopening something I had already stepped out of. The last time I saw her in the apartment, she was standing by the door with a box in her hands. Not much left behind at that point. Just the final pieces. She looked at me like she was waiting for something. Not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. You're really not going to say anything? She asked. I kept my tone even. There's nothing I need to say. She nodded slowly, like she expected that answer but still needed to hear it. This isn't as simple as you think, she said. Maybe not. She held my gaze for a second longer, then shifted the box in her hands and opened the door. No hesitation. No pause at the threshold. She left the same way everything else had ended between us. Without resistance. After that, the apartment felt different. Not empty. Just settled. Like something that had been out of place for a while had finally been removed, and everything else adjusted around it without effort. Her messages slowed down after that, then stopped. There was no final call, no last attempt to bring things back into conversation. Whatever she needed to say stayed with her. And that was fine, because by then, there was nothing left between us that required words. I still think about that line sometimes. Not in the way I expected. It doesn't come with anger anymore, or even curiosity. Just the memory of how clean it felt when everything finally made sense in a single moment. She said it was over time. At the time, it sounded like an explanation. Something temporary. Something that fit into the structure of a normal life. Now it sounds different. Quieter. Like a detail that belongs to a version of my life that doesn't exist anymore. I don't go back through what happened. There's no reason to. Everything I needed to understand revealed itself without force, without confrontation. It unfolded on its own, the same way it had been running long before I noticed it. That's the part that stays with me. Not the betrayal itself, but how little noise it actually made when it ended. No final argument. No closure conversation. Just a shift, and then distance. Sometimes I pass by that area of the city and recognize the building. Same glass, same reflections, nothing visibly different from the outside. It doesn't pull anything out of me. It's just another place. And that line, same room as last time, it doesn't belong to me anymore either. It's just something I heard once, and then left behind. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.